The underlying thread of everything that's happening in an IFS session is that the self and the parts of the client can connect. That means also if I as the client am in an IFS session, it's me that's there, but more importantly it's my whole system that's there. All of my parts are there, myself is there, and the session is really about what's happening in this internal system. So in a way, me as a client, I bring my system and it's about myself giving that system space, but also the job of the therapist is to give the system of the client and the self of the client the space for that connection. That's the whole underlying principle of IFS therapy. And these steps, finding, focusing, and all the steps I'm going to take you through are steps to enable that. And I want to kind of explain in a more theoretical way first how that works. Now, if you imagine a client coming to a session, very rarely, especially if they don't know IFS very well, do they come and say, I want to work on that part. But they rather come with a problem. They say, this situation is difficult in my life. They say, this person is bothering me, I have these feelings and I don't know how to be with them. They come with a problem, with a certain situation in their life. And the IFS assumption is that any situation, any problem you have, is created by a part, or is created by multiple parts. Parts that are in extreme roles, so they have a reason for what they're doing, but they're creating that problem nonetheless. So step one in the IFS process, which is called finding, is to find out what part we are working with. So based on the situation the client brings, what part is it we're working with, and finding that part in or around our body. That's the first step in which IFS makes the problem somebody comes with into a part, like clarifies which part is that, and situates that part somewhere in or around the body. So there's something in the current experience that the client can work with here and now. And that's the very important first step of IFS, finding out which part are we dealing with, which part is creating these situations, and where do we feel, or where does the client feel that part in or around their body, because the experience is that it is always situated in or around their bodies. So in this schema, it's first talking about the situation, talking about what the problem is, but then getting down to, okay, and which part is creating that? Usually there's a certain experience coming along with what they're talking about. They're feeling angry, or they're feeling dreadful, or they're having certain thoughts that are going on. And it's taking that and asking the client, where do you feel that in or around your body? Where do these thoughts, these feelings come from? And thus turning it into a part, zoning in on a part. And usually that's a step where the client can then get clear on, okay, that's that part, that's what we're going to be exploring for now. That's that first step of finding the part, finding it in or around their body. Then, based on having found a part and having located it somewhere in the body, around the body, the next step is to turn our attention inwards and to focus our attention on that part. IFS works very much in the present. IFS works with what is your experience of that part right now? Where do you feel that part right now? Where are those thoughts coming from right now? So the second step is focusing the attention inwards, focusing the attention on that part that was located in the system, and learning about it. When you put your attention on that part, when you turn your attention inwards and connect with that part, how does it seem to you? How are you aware of it? So it's focusing the attention and then learning about that part. This is already, for many clients, a step that's unusual and can sometimes even be slightly scary, which would mean that there's a part present that's scared of turning the attention inwards, because many people are not used to turning their attention inwards, not used to focusing on something that's happening in their experience. So that second step of focusing can be so important and is something that should really be taken serious, of focusing the attention inwards on the experience here and now. But also taking serious if there is a part that's scared of that. All parts are welcome. Now, through focusing on a part, this naturally leads to the third step in the IFS process, which is fleshing out. The third step of the process means to flesh out the part that we are focusing on. By turning the attention on the part, we are learning about it. We are learning how it feels in the body. We're learning about maybe how it reacts, what its fears are. We're learning about how we experience that part here and now. And that's a very important step, because through that we make a connection with it that's in the present. We make a connection with it in the experience here and now. And that's making that part become real. So where in the beginning it was maybe just it's kind of here, and then through focusing on it and allowing it to flesh out, we maybe have an image of it. We maybe have a feeling of, wow, it feels angry, or it even looks angry with steam coming out of its ears. We get the sense of that part as more of a full being that we are in connection with. So the fleshing out, the focusing on it, and then allowing the part to become more of a full-fledged being also allows a certain separation to happen. We are exploring that part. How does that part look? How does it feel? How does it seem to us? And this allows a certain separation where maybe the part in the beginning is very much blended. I feel it here. Through experiencing it as a part, we are slowly helping it to separate from the seat of consciousness and become aware of it as its own part, as its own entity. Based on that, fleshing out the part and then also it separating a bit from the self, we come to one of the most unique and most important steps in the IFS process, which is called feel towards. Now, feel towards is why this huge flower that I call self-energy, self and self-energy, is here. And I will go a little bit more in depth with this step, because I think it's so unique and I think it's so important when we're talking about what IFS does and how IFS works. Now, the fourth steps of feeling towards is the very simple question of, what do you feel towards that part? So the question implies, what do you as the self feel towards the part? And it's kind of the step where we test whether or not we have separated from the part. Now, there are multiple answers that are quite normal to come when that question is asked. There is answer option number one. When asked, what do you feel towards that part? The answer is, this part is me. I don't feel anything towards it. Which means that the part has still taken over the seat of consciousness. The part is still blended with you. You're one with the part still. So there is no separation, which is totally okay. But it tells us that the part is there, but the part is still occupying the seat of consciousness. And that means the self is not really present yet. Option number two would be, what do you feel towards the part? I don't like it. I'm angry with it and I think it's useless. That means we have a certain reaction towards the part. We don't like it. We are not in a present, open connection with it, but we have judgments towards it. We don't like it, all of those things. This simply means that another part has taken over the seat of consciousness, and it's that part that's interacting with the part we're exploring. It's this part that's determining how we feel towards and about that part. And if that happens, there is a very simple step, which would be asking this part to step aside. But I'll get to that in a second. Now, the third answer that's quite normal when we ask, what do you feel towards that part, is, I feel open towards it and actually curious. I want to learn and understand it. And that would mean that the part is there, but also self is there. That would mean that self is the inhabitant of the seat of consciousness, and we are in self, so we are naturally open towards it. We're naturally experiencing those 8 C's, and there is a relationship already between the self and the part. That's what's so important, because we talked about self being the agent of healing and the agent of transformation in IFS. So this step of what do you feel towards that part is all about testing if the self energy is there, or if there is enough of it there. So we had 3 different answers. I'm feeling open, curious towards it, self, or I am the part. I don't feel anything towards it, this is just me. The part is blended, or I don't like it, I don't like that part. A concerned part is blended. And the very unique way IFS now deals with this would be asking these parts to separate, asking them to unblend. So, for instance, if the part we want to explore is still inhabiting the seat of consciousness, still blended with us, we would ask it to separate a little bit. We would literally ask the part, is it okay for you to step aside a little bit so I can get to know you? Because as long as you're blended with me, as long as you're mixed with me, I can't actually get to know you. And the very fascinating thing is that many times the parts will just say, okay. Or they will literally not say anything, but they will separate. And suddenly we feel, wow, there's a distance between me and that part. And based on that distance, I can suddenly interact with it. I can suddenly learn about it. There's a relationship there. This is what happens with the parts when they unblend. Sometimes they don't. Then we have to explore a little bit more deeply why it doesn't unblend, why it doesn't separate from us, which is beyond the scope of this video. There will be more in-depth videos at some point in time. But often they do, and then there's suddenly a relationship possible between the self and the part. The same is true with a concerned part. The part that says, I don't like this. Can you separate a little bit? No. Is it okay for you if you separate for just 5 minutes so I can get to know that part? It's not about that part taking over, not about that part controlling everything, but it's about getting to know that part. Are you okay with that? Okay. And then they step aside, and it's not us doing that. It's not us pushing the part away. It's not us making the part go away, but it naturally does that. And what then usually happens is that people suddenly feel different. They feel different towards the part they previously, just 5 seconds ago, did not like. Suddenly they're open. The part that 5 seconds ago they were like, that's annoying, suddenly they're open towards it. And it's this that is at the core of this feel towards. It's about testing, is enough self present, but beyond testing it, it's about unblending them, because all of the next steps they ask for the self, or they ask for the self energy to be there. To really befriend the part, we need that self energy to really learn about why it does, what what its positive intent is. We need the self, and we need the self energy to be present, which is why this step, this feeling towards, is so important. And that's the fourth step in the IFS process. Now, based on what happened with the feel towards, based on the start of the self being present and the part being present, in the next step, which is called befriending, what can happen is that the self and the part start to develop a real relationship. They become friends, which is why it's called befriending. But what does that mean in detail? It can mean quite a few different things, but in general, it's for the self to learn about the part. So the self can now really learn, why does the part do what it does? What is the intention the part has for the system? What is its positive intent? What is it trying to do? It can also get to know the part in a more, what does it feel? What are the fears it has? So the part can really, the self can really learn about the part. And usually when the self learns about the part, it starts having an understanding, but also an embodied compassion. There's an embodied, I get why the part does that. That does not mean I agree with how it does things, but I get why the part does what it does. If it's worried about the things it's worried about, the steps it takes are oftentimes a rather clumsy attempt to do that, but I get it. And that compassion, that understanding, that clarity can be shared with the part. The self can show that to the part. Now, some parts are immediately aware of the self, they're aware, oh, that's the self, boom. They might not have been aware of it before, but they just get it. Many parts, even though they may share with the self, this is what I do, this is my role, or blah, 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 they are not actually aware that this is the self. So in a way, for this part to realize, whoa, there's something that's not a part. There is somebody in this system that's stronger, bigger, more powerful than I am, and it's actually on my side. It's not trying to get rid of me, it's not blaming me for anything, but it's on my side, it's supporting me. That can be a huge thing for the part. And the part sharing, this is what I do, these are the fears I have, and the self understanding, compassionately reacting to that, and the part feeling, wow, the self understands, it doesn't judge, I'm welcome here, all parts are welcome, can be so important that the part can relax a little bit. The part can start to trust the self and be with the self in a way that it has never been before. It can show why it does the things. And it doesn't have to become overly activated. They're like, but it can share with the self what drives it, what its motivations are. And then, based on that creation of a relationship, based on the part getting that the self is there, realizing that the self understands it, is in connection with it, feels compassion for it. One of the steps the step that comes then is called fears. And that's for the self to begin to understand and ask, what are the biggest fears this part has? What does the part think would happen if it stopped doing what it's doing? What are the worst visions, nightmares that this part has of what could happen if it didn't hold on so tight, if it didn't constantly take over and do things? What would happen? And this is often a repetitive question. So this point of fears is not just, what are your biggest fears? Okay. But it's often like, what are your biggest fears? Okay. And so let's imagine this part has the fear that if it didn't try to make everything right, nobody would like it. And then the part can be like, wow, nobody would like you. And if nobody liked you, what is the worst thing that could happen then? So there's kind of a deepening into that fear and really understanding what's the motivation this part has. What makes this part tick? And then maybe through asking that question again, it comes down to, I would feel all alone and I would be all alone. And often what then happens is that feeling or that being alone that this part is so worried about shows itself. And that's usually when an exile, whatever this part has been protecting, comes up.
You never know what's around the next corner. So.